Good afternoon, everyone. And on behalf of my colleagues at Q, welcome to today's webinar to review and discuss the results of the 2024 In-Vehicle Visuals Report. During today's webinar, we'll demonstrate how each of you can access, free of charge, the database of the 100 best-selling vehicles of 2023. That database shows how those vehicles are equipped and gives insights into how today's radio listeners, and to a growing extent, radio viewers, can expect to find in each of these vehicles. We'll then review our findings of the study as prepared by data researcher Doug Hyde, who has extensive experience with the broadcast industry and whose work has been invaluable with this project. And after that foundation has been laid, we'll be joined by Fred Jacobs, Paul Jacobs, Joe D'Angelo, and Mike McVay for their insights into the findings of how radio can take maximum advantage of the information we found. We look forward to the next hour. When we get to our panel discussion, you'll have an opportunity because we will welcome your questions. We'll instruct you how to do that at that time, and we will answer as many of them as possible. So without further delay, let's get started in our discussion of Q's 2024 In-Vehicle Visuals Report. This report was something that Q set about doing because we recognized almost on a daily basis the need for a resource to answer questions about the various ways that different manufacturers had equipped and standardized their dashboards. And while they may standardize within their particular make and model, there's hardly any standardization across the automotive industry as a whole. Many times we would hear from a client station, we would hear from others that were involved that they didn't know whether they could or could not see a station's text or a station's image on the dashboard. And we wanted to put in one easy place to go that a station's engineering team, programming team, sales department, or clients could go and find out how their vehicle is equipped. And while it's a huge universe, we couldn't start with every vehicle that was on the highway. Thought the best place to start was with the 100 best-selling vehicles in 2023. We do intend for this report to provide the broadcast industry with new research. We don't know what we don't know, and that's the reason for this report. We hope it's a yardstick. We look forward to providing this report to the industry on an annual basis. And while we're gathering the data, we thought we'd leave it up to the experts to help us interpret this data. And that's why we enlisted Doug Hyde and the four faces you see on the screen, Fred, Paul, Joe, and Mike, that are all joining us today. And we'll be discussing this as we move through. So a little bit about how we went about gathering this information. We didn't want to depend on AI or we didn't want to depend on a Google search. We thought it was important to actually put someone in the vehicle. So we went to 100 vehicles at a variety of dealerships across 3 states and asked a very talented young man by the name of Jackson Houchins to come on board with us in an independent researcher position. We took the top 100 selling vehicles as referenced by goodcarbadcar.net, and Jackson set about going out and doing these studies. We wanted to gauge radio's in-dash standing. Each dashboard was analyzed for audio entertainment features, visual components. We wanted to gather as much information as we could, including photographs that we were able to provide to the industry. So that's the methodology that we used. And then the next step that we wanted to move about was how we were going to analyze the data. I mentioned earlier, we engaged independent broadcast radio researcher Doug Hyde to analyze the data. We left it up to him. We didn't try to steer his opinions one direction or another. We gave him the data that had been returned from this study and said, please take a look at it and let us know what you see as the trends or the important nuggets that the industry needs to understand. And then we brought in our panel of experts, as we said, to provide them access to the information and ask them to provide their opinions. So that's how we got to this point. That's what this is all about. We're going to look at the scoreboard. We're going to look at the findings. I'd like to now ask my colleague, Joe Marshall, who on our team had the lead on this particular project. Joe is our Senior Director for Technical Services and does a great job with Q every day working with our engineering teams. Joe and Jackson worked very closely with one another. Joe actually devised the questionnaire that was important for us to gather on these. You can see this is a screenshot. Joe, talk about the first screen that people will see when they come on board and what this overview is and what this first page is intended to be, and then take us on into the next step that gives even richer information.
Yeah, we wanted to give a quick overview of each vehicle and what a broadcaster might expect to want to know about the vehicle. That generally comes down to things to do with FM RDS as well as the HD. So we've really just done a really quick summary on this front page so that you can see the basic functionality of the broadcast signals. As you dive deeper, there's a lot more details behind the scenes of each vehicle. If you just click on each line, you get a much richer details page.
Yeah, we if I could, we realized that there was
Yeah.
a lot of information that you had gathered in this project, but it would be impossible to put it on one screen. So while this is the overview, let's advance now and show people the behind the scenes information that gives them the ability to access all the information on each of these vehicles. So while they're all on the first page, talk about some of this richer information that you provide on the deeper dive.
Yeah, like I said, we captured the broadcast related data, but we also wanted to capture the other types of audio sources and entertainment options that each vehicle provided. This has been very important as the screens have become larger and richer and in higher resolution. There's a lot of things that are being offered. So not only did we capture which vehicles have radio text, HD text, HD images, we also surveyed things like Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, streaming apps in cars, and also the capabilities that might have been missing in some vehicles that we might have expected to see.
So let's not just talk about it. Let's actually, or show it. Let's give people a real-time experience. You can talk people through. We're just going to take a couple of minutes here, but let people see how easy it is to navigate through this report.
Yeah, so you can see the report right now at qreport.com. You can see in the URL in my browser. All you have to do is click see the data, and this will take you to the full report with all of the details for each vehicle. The really cool thing about this is you can actually sort each column separately if you want to look at model years, makes, or even specific features on this summary page. One thing that's excellent is if you're looking at a specific car, the example just shown was the Escalade. I can actually search for Escalade. All I have to do is click on that line, and this will show me all the details that we've captured. So we went through and created very specific questions for each car, and Jackson literally sat in each of these cars at 3 different dealerships or 3 different cities. All of the dealerships that we had to identify were spread out over 3 different cities. So he actually sat in each of these vehicles and also took pictures. So I can show you the details, and as you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see a picture. One represents a station that's broadcasting in HD. I can click on the image if you want to see a much more detailed version of that. And this shows you a really nice presentation of the HD. Also, if you want to see how a RDS or FM only station would be represented, you can see that as well in the RDS picture. And you can see there's some differences in how that's presented. So that's the basic navigation of the report. Lots of filtering and lots of sorting options. You can find specific cars or specific makes if you want to look at those separately.
Joe, thanks so much for the incredible amount of work that you put in on this. And obviously, we appreciate the work that you and Jackson both did. But we want this to be a resource that is used by the industry. It is free. It's available. We hope everybody on this webinar makes active use of this and goes in and checks out any information they have. As we started gathering the additional information, we also recognized that there were probably some key points that we wanted to monitor on an ongoing basis. While this is the first year, it's not yet an annual report. This is the inaugural report, but we certainly anticipate doing this again in 2025. But here are the 10 features that we wanted to measure so that we could start looking for trends in the years ahead. FM radio, 100% of the vehicles were equipped with FM. 98% of those had AM. 70%. To our friend Joe D'Angelo and the folks at Xperi, that's a great number. 70% of the vehicles that are coming off of the top 100 selling vehicles had HD radio equipped. 92% have Sirius XM. As we know, that doesn't mean that they'll all be activated for the long term, but they are certainly equipped with that technology. Android Auto and Apple CarPlay both come in at 98%. Built-in streaming apps, it's at 20%. We think that number may be higher, but it wasn't readily apparent, but that is an increasing trend. And we all know that if they have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, there's an infinite number of streaming apps that they might be able to access, but those that are being put in organically are coming from within the particular automotive manufacturers, 20% at this point. Text displays, 100% of the vehicles on the road being manufactured, or the top 100 selling vehicles from last year, have the ability to display text for radio. I think that's a huge number that everyone needs to pay attention to. There's no limiting factor. 60% have image displays. For a long time, to put into context, those two numbers have historically been, including all vehicles on the road, 80% were equipped with text, 20% were equipped with image displays. So while this doesn't change those numbers for how your 1998 Mustang is equipped is how your 1998 Mustang is equipped, but this does show that there is an increasing trend and a desire for people with new vehicles. They want that text, they want that imaging, and the auto manufacturers are responding. And then finally, the radio button. And I'll define what the radio button means in this study. It means one touch to get to the radio tuner. So whether it's an AM, FM, XM button, or whether it's a radio button, it means one touch. What's not included in this is audio followed by radio, or media followed by audio followed by radio. We were looking for the one touch, easy access, easy accessibility. I was asked by someone earlier today if I thought that that was a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know. We don't know what the trends are, but 36% is what we found this year, and we'll see what happens. So now let's go to the 6 key findings. We'll move through these quickly. Many of you may have already seen these in some of the trade press. Some are not going to be a shock. Others are very insightful, and we'll talk about that with our panelists. So the first key finding, AM/FM radio is ubiquitous in new vehicles. It's a great number. We're in a great situation, but number 2 quickly says we're not alone in that situation. While we have 100% with FM, 98% with AM, Apple CarPlay and Android Auto both are at 98%, basically on the same playing field or at the same level as over-the-air radio. A growing number of vehicles are offering the built-in streaming apps. We think that that is something that is going to become more and more prevalent, partly because I think that you'll see the individual auto manufacturers negotiate and build alliances with those streaming companies, whomever they may be, some of the larger distribution companies. So be prepared that that number is going to continue to grow. 2 out of 3 new vehicles have HD radio installed. We talked about this a moment ago. The number is actually 70%. It's slightly over 2/3, but that's a number that presents a lot of opportunity for the radio industry. But quickly behind that, and we're going to talk about this more in depth as we get into it, we found General Motors is an exception to the widespread adoption of HD radio. And I think, as I've said, I think General Motors zigged while the rest of the automotive industry zagged. They went through a period, General Motors went through a period where they were putting a lot of emphasis on data. They were putting a lot of emphasis on what they were going to do that was unique. It's a decision that I think the folks at Xperi have done everything within their power, but General Motors made that decision, and you need to know the impact of that. And then all new vehicles have in-dash text. We talked about it. Most can display logos and other images. The opportunity is now for broadcasters to take advantage of the visual component to what has historically been audio. So let's go one by one. I'll move through these. I don't want to delay, but I also don't want to fly through these. This is where you'll see Doug's insights as we convey those. So key finding number 1, AM/FM radio is ubiquitous. What does this mean? We do continue to enjoy universal distribution in new vehicles. As Doug put it, the rumors of AM/FM radio disappearing from the dashboard have been greatly exaggerated. Those that want to be contrarians to the over-the-air broadcast industry may talk about how the technology is being replaced. The automotive industry responds to what consumers want. Consumers want over-the-air radio in their vehicles. And I know there's been a lot of discussion about the electric segment and AM, and the NAB is staying vigilant on that. But for the 2024 report and 2023 vehicles, it's 100% for FM, 98% for AM. And despite all of the noise, we have universal acceptance. But it's no longer a dashboard monopoly. We're universally available, but we cannot be overconfident. 92% of the vehicles have Sirius XM capability. 98% of the vehicles have Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. 98% of those, that's a big number. And I think we can all remember in the not so distant past when Apple CarPlay started making its way into vehicles and it was kind of a new technology. Consumers want Apple CarPlay and Android Auto in their vehicles, and the auto manufacturers are responding to that. It does, if you could, Joe, I'm sorry, I gave you a false cue there, but it does give you the ability to understand that those two platforms are opening up gates to a lot of different audio capabilities in the dashboard. So whether it's audiobooks, podcast, whatever it is, it's not just audio sources from there, but they do open up the availability of all kinds of information on the screen. The dashboard is crowded. Now let's go to finding number 3. A growing number of vehicles offer the streaming apps. We've talked about this. Apple Music, Amazon Alexa are appearing directly on the dashboard. General Motors and Toyota are the two that are most prevalent. And that's consistent with the fact that General Motors said we're going to participate in the streaming climate. We're going to not participate so much on the over-the-air with HD. I don't think that's the right decision for General Motors, but the numbers are what the numbers are. And at least 20% offered the built-in streaming apps, with the caveat that we want to make sure we say more vehicles may be equipped with the technology, but it was not readily apparent. Key finding number 4 for us on this was also one that I think a lot of folks in the industry are very excited about. HD radio availability is strong. If you are a small market broadcaster like I am, and your local General Motors dealership is prevalent in your community, whether it's your GMC or your Chevy or your Buick dealerships, you may not have HD radio in your car, and the world you live in may cause you to say, well, I just don't see it being that much of an issue. 70% of the vehicles that were in the top 100 selling cars are equipped with this technology. It is there, it is real. It is an opportunity for the radio industry to take advantage of. So don't let what might be your perception from the world you're living in with your GM vehicle, don't let that cloud your overall view. And I will tell you that I was probably guilty of that myself. I'm really quite surprised by that number. But here's the other side, the counter. Only 3% of the vehicles in the survey were General Motors vehicles with HD radios. They represented 19 of the top 100 selling vehicles, but only 3% or 3 of the 19 offered that. We're going to talk about that in a bit, kind of how that led to it. I don't think there's necessarily an industry rallying call for us to do something with it, but I think it is something that we need to be aware of, because that may have an impact on the perception of someone in your advertising community or your business community or your broadcast community about what is readily available and the advantages. And finally, key finding number 6. All new vehicles have in-dash text. It includes content, customized text, title artists, song title, station logos on 60% of the vehicles, album art on 60% of the vehicles. In-dash vehicle experience cannot be delayed. You can't neglect it any longer. Implementation is really not something that the radio industry can see as optional. Compared to XM, Sirius, compared to Apple, Spotify, our competitors are coming in with the visuals. And as we've been saying, many of us for a long time, the time is now, probably a little past now, for the radio industry to embrace it. So those are the 6 key findings that Doug had. The question is, what can radio do today? Q's role in this was to gather the information, let Doug Hyde interpret the data, but then we wanted to ask experts to come in and say, what can radio do today? We convened, but we're going to let the experts offer the suggestions as opposed to Q being the ones. We know what we know. These gentlemen know what they know. So let me begin with the first. I'd like to introduce Fred Jacobs. Fred really needs no introduction in the broadcast business. He is president of Jacobs Media, longtime programming consultant. Many of us read Fred's blog on a daily basis, and he is someone that has given a tremendous amount of thought to this. So Fred, I've done bullet points, but I'd like for you to take a couple of moments and walk through your thoughts and expand on these and give your observations about this information to the folks that are with us today on the webinar.
Well, thank you, Steve, and kudos to Q for doing this analysis. This is such an important thing for the industry. And I looked at this, of course, from the programmer's vantage point here, because I think there is a tremendous opportunity to connect with the audience in the intimacy of their cars. And so many people are by themselves when they're driving, and we know about that relationship between a host and a driver, but to a certain extent, that messaging that is happening in the dashboard can almost be like push notifications in the car. It is, in fact, that powerful. And yet we see a lot of stations doing what I call random acts of metadata at this point, really not applying a whole lot of strategy to their messaging in the vehicle. So we have a tremendous opportunity here to be able to connect with the audience in unique ways. And oh, by the way, a lot of other audio sources in the vehicle are not making use of any messaging. So this is a great opportunity for us. The Apple CarPlay and Android Auto pieces are really important here, and this kind of ties in with the next point as well. I mean, there are more options that drivers and passengers can select in the car. And as my old friend from Emmis, Rick Cummings, used to say, choice kills, right? The more choices that people have to choose from, the more pressure there is on all of us in radio to make sure that our content is there. So as it applies to Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, it's really important that your mobile app shows up in their ecosystems. I told the story in our blog today about how difficult it was for us at Jake Apps to actually make that first contact with Cupertino and actually get this together. You need to be sure that your mobile app developer has included this access to your app, because when people actually go into Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, the radio in the vehicle, for all intents and purposes, disappears. It's back there, but you really have to go through a few steps in order to get it. So making sure your mobile app is in fact visible on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, extremely important. The metadata piece, as it applies to images, graphics, and text, really allow us to be able to really have a great experience. But we've got to do the work. We've got to make sure that our metadata looks good, that it's accurate, that it is in fact really consistent. This is really important, and a lot of stations are still lagging behind when it comes to how their metadata looks. So hopefully this study will be a clarion call for broadcasters to get their metadata acts together. And then finally is the strategy piece. And I think this is so important as well. I was in a rent-a-car on Eclipse Day, and I went from 88 to 108 just to see what stations in this particular market that shall remain anonymous were actually displaying. And most of the stations did have a logo up for their radio station, but that was really it. And there really was no other messaging going on except for advertisers. And I think as a programmer, if you begin to think of this as another way to get your messages across and to keep your radio station sounding current, whether it's things going on in town or in the world or on your radio station, whether it's April Fool's Day or Groundhog Day or Eclipse Day, you can really make great use of the metadata for strategic purposes. So, Steve, that's my Fred's takeaways.
It's great, insightful as always. And Fred, so I would ask you to kind of summarize, give us a recap, and then we'll invite younger brother Paul to step up.
You had to mention that he's younger, didn't you? So, I think the big takeaway here is that the old days of 2 knobs, 6 presets, and a CD player or an 8-track player are long gone. And I think a report like this really provides us with the data that we need to be able to really visualize radio's opportunities in the dash.
All right. Thanks so much, Fred. I do appreciate it. Folks that have the pleasure of working with Jacobs Media know how there's a great balance between Fred's take on the programming side, and Paul's extensive experience with how to monetize the programming. Paul Jacobs, equally talented and a great friend as well. But Paul, I thought you had some really interesting insights to this as it came to the revenue side of this and your observations. And I'd invite you to review those with everybody and talk about your bullet points and expand on those.
Well, thank you. And I'll do it with youthful enthusiasm. It's interesting. This morning, I posted a link in social media for this webinar and for the report. And somebody who works in the business snarkily commented, so wait, the finding of this study is that there's AM, FM radio in cars. That's it. And I'm thinking to myself, you don't talk to clients. Okay. When you're out talking to advertisers, you, as a salesperson, you hear things like people don't listen to the radio anymore. You can't even buy a radio. What the key finding of this study is that we always talk about radio's reach, and now we can talk about radio's access, and access equals reach. And so we think just that key finding should be taken out to clients of all types to make sure they understand that unlike a lot of other traditional media, we're blowing and going. We are where people are. We are where people are listening when they're making buying decisions. I mean, that old RAB trope, but it is absolutely true. We are in the car. And the salespeople need to be the people on the front lines championing this, but they also need to take it to car dealers. One of our problems in the car industry is we're not as present as we need to be. Yeah, we show up to sell and we show up to do remotes. But the fact is, when it comes time for people to take a test drive, the first thing a consumer asks is how to pair my phone. And we have found in the past that car salespeople aren't showing off radio because nobody honestly asks, hey, show me the radio. But the fact is, if we're present and we look good, and it's important to the car dealership to show us off, we need to make that case. It's an important category, and we need the industry to see us. Metadata, Fred talked about it, but I have to tell you, man, there is something about hearing an ad and seeing a concurrent message supporting that ad in the RDS, or seeing a sponsor logo. It's just great. Or content that supports a promotion that's happening right now, or an upcoming ticket giveaway to add value to that sponsor. So all of a sudden, we have this tool in the dashboard that can really change things. It can show scores and topics, weather warnings. I mean, all the things we do, we can now enhance it out. And then finally, and Steve, you mentioned this a second ago, but we should not overlook this at all in sales. You can't buy ads on Spotify. You can't buy ads on Sirius XM. You can't buy ads from Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. But if you have a mobile app, you can sell them the pre-roll to your stream, and you can do other things. So we need to look at a car now, not only as this amazing way to reach everybody in our town, but to reach them much more effectively, and to really enhance what we're offering to advertisers. So Steve, that's my overall summary.
Before I ask you to summarize, I'll share a little bit of a story that when I first got the information back, you talked about the person saying, so the results of this are that 100% of the cars have FM radio. And I kind of had that same reaction, but then I said, no, the result of this is radio has 100% and 98%, and Apple CarPlay has 98% and 98% with Android Auto. So it's not that radio is in every car. I think that we didn't need to do a study to figure that out, but it is how much competition we have in the vehicle now is what really has come from this. And I understand that, but we're going to monitor that trend to make sure that we don't lose ground. Paul, I will ask you, like I did Fred, if you would kind of summarize your thoughts on this and what your takeaways were.
Well, and to follow up on that point, Steve, I like selling in talking points because clients remember little bites, and that radio is available in 100% of all new cars. It sounds so simple, but it really, is a key takeaway. So radio's enhanced presence in the dash is a key message to advertisers about the vitality and relevance of the medium. At pivotal moments in the buying decision, radio provides a sound and a sight experience designed to capture and motivate consumers. So it's really exciting.
That's great. Our next person that's going to join, our next expert, is a great friend, has spent a tremendous amount of time working with the radio industry as a vendor, coming to it from Xperi and many years through the growth of HD radio and now DTS and AutoStage, which provides such an exciting future for the broadcast industry. Joe D'Angelo is with Xperi, their Senior Vice President of Global Broadcast Radio. Joe, glad to have you with us. You've been toiling in the vineyards for a lot of years, trying to get people to recognize the opportunities there. I'd like for you to take a few minutes and elaborate on what you saw as the big takeaways from this report.
Sure. Thanks, Steve. And congratulations on this report. I think the findings, as well as your commitment to run this year over year, are exemplary. And I think we're going to see continued growth in a lot of areas that'll be fascinating for us to watch. But I want to remind everybody that as it relates to HD radio, you're converting one of the largest infrastructures in the planet. If you think of the number of cars on the road, there are about 300 million or so registered passenger vehicles in the US. And then there are tens of thousands of radio stations. And converting an infrastructure like that takes time. It takes time and diligence. And believe it or not, we're now at over 100 million cars on the road. So the industry has clearly adopted the evolution of broadcast technology. And on the broadcast side, our current broadcasters represent over 65% of all radio listening. So while there's still tremendous opportunity for stations to continue to convert, audiences are really already enjoying a lot of HD radio content. And I think that's demonstrated in your findings here. Broadcast radio is not alone. Everyone's said it. I'll just reiterate it. As cars become more and more connected, either through tethering or embedded modems, the ability for consumers to access other audio contents is just going to explode. And they're going to find it. I do think we have one thing working in our favor in that regard, is that paradox of choice. With too much choice, you see people revert back to the known and trusted brands. So I do think radio has to definitely leverage that opportunity. In these digital landscapes, though, discovery of content and engagement with content is critical. And a lot of that is driven by metadata. All you have to do is look in your own personal lives, as your interactions with Netflix or Spotify. There is always a consistent metadata offering alongside the content, whether it's video or audio. That's what consumers expect. That's what you need to actually begin to deliver, and you can, thanks to companies like Q. That being said, I think broadcasters need to continue to focus on what they do best, which is that local connection with your community. It's what makes broadcast radio different from any other audio source. That local connection, that trusted voice, that curated content is why people come back to radio. Just keep doing that, lean into it, do more of it, and find ways to serve niche audiences within your community. I've also observed that broadcasters feel pulled in 100 different directions. They feel they have to be on every platform. Everything that's digital gets equivocated. And if you're not on platform X or Y, you're going to be left behind. I don't think that's actually the right way to approach this. I think your time, your resources are limited. Your content is extremely valuable, and it needs to be protected. So as you make choices, as you plan your digital strategy, be selective. Put your efforts into the platforms that are going to deliver the value to you and your audience. Don't follow this trend of thinking you have to be everywhere. And I think the dashboard is got to be first and foremost in that strategy. So Steve,
right,
that's my key takeaways.
Great. I'll ask you, as I've done with Fred and Paul, I'll ask you to kind of recap your overall thoughts on this and share with folks what your summary is.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little more verbose than the rest of you. But the dashboard is critical. I think your audience is loyal. That's undeniable. They spend time with you every day. The analytics that we're generating are proving that. And you have tremendous opportunities in these digital dashboards. You just need to lean into them, take advantage of them for both metadata and programming.
All right, content curation and programming, two words that ring true for our next guest. Thank you, Joe. And
Yep.
Next, I'd like to bring Mike McVay to the forefront. Mike, name is synonymous with programming expertise and consulting, with a long history in American radio that has spoken for itself with his many victories. Mike, thanks for joining us today. And I'd like to turn to you. I was observing, Joe has been with Xperi for many, many years, and Fred and Paul have had the auto industry in their view and scope for a lot of time. You probably come to this particular facet of the conversation today intentionally. You are more the programmer. You're not so much about the dashboard or auto. You're about radio stations succeeding. And so I'd like for you to talk about your strategies with that viewpoint. And then when we get the full group, we'll have a conversation about it. But elaborate on your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you very much. And like the other gentlemen have said, the competition for the audience is increasing. It's going to continue to increase. It's not going to go away. And in many cases, I think that demands improvement in content and making the overall listening experience better over the air and online. And so the connected car has, for all intents and purposes, leveled the playing field by eliminating our exclusivity. Radio has the opportunity to provide content and information that goes beyond one sense, the sense of sound, by adding sight to it. And so if you get into a Tesla for the first time, or any of the new cars that have big dashboard videos, that's what gets your attention immediately. It's like that, whoa. And it's so very different from what the older cars have. Radio can't sit back and say, well, we'll get to that when the cars get there, because they've got to start focusing on the new audience, and the old audience will adjust and change and come along. So imagine hearing a traffic report and looking at your screen and seeing the visualization of the map with the traffic problems at the same time you're hearing it on the radio. Imagine a commercial where you get a QR code. All of those things can and will be a big part of the videozation that's going to happen. And so radio programming needs to go beyond that one sense. Connectivity to a community is really important to us. And so that could be a literal community, meaning whatever town you live in, or it could be a virtual community of like-minded people who have similar likes and similar wants and desires connecting to them. And so the enhanced in-car entertainment and information experience can also enhance that dependency that we used to have. There was a time when you would hear a news talk radio station say, depend on, and then it would tell you what's in the news. That's not the same thing today with so many other elements delivering information. And I think by tying our senses together, that can be a big help. And then expand your reach with HD2 and HD3 channels, much like you might find a Sirius XM or one of the other streamers do, where suddenly there's the Garth channel. Why can't you do that with your HD2 and 3? And why can't you promote it on the screens in your car to move an audience to your other channels? That can be the same for podcasts, promotion on a whole, because suddenly now we're able to compete at point of purchase. I'm a big fan of billboards for marketing and radio because of the in-car, and you're driving down the road and you see a billboard and you hit the station. We can actually use our own screens to do that for our multiple platforms. And while Joe had said he's not so much be everywhere, be seen everywhere, I know that means about which platforms you get into. I do actually like to be omnipresent. Because I look at like my grandkids, when they get in the car, I can be listening to the sports station and they automatically take over my radio with their apps. And it might be the top 40 in the town I live in. And I'll say to them, hey guys, I could have just hit the button for the radio. No, we're good. Because they have the app on their phone and they just know in their world, they're going to connect and listen wherever. And so I think we need to start thinking about OTA in a different light, that it's on a lot of platforms and that experience has to be lifted up in every one of them. And that kind of encapsulates the 5 points I would share.
Well, as we've done with your three buddies here, let's ask you to recap with your thoughts and summarize those.
So the in-dash experience has to be at a higher level for radio to be seen as an equal to the other audio sources available. And, it's like when you're a small market radio station and people say, well, we don't have to sound as good as the bigger cities. Listeners have it coming in from everywhere. And so the same is true for the listening experience we create in the dash. And that's going to require improving the listening experience with both quality and content, as well as displaying text logos and other images that really take advantage of that big center stack screen board.
All right. Thank you so much. Let's recap the 6 findings, and then we'll open it up for the roundtable conversation. AM radio is ubiquitous, but we're not the only ones anymore. Finding number 2, we no longer have the monopoly in the dashboard. Number 3, a growing number of vehicles are offering streaming apps. We expect that number to be increasing. 70%, over 2/3 of new vehicles have HD radios installed. General Motors is an exception to that. Generally, the automotive industry is really accepting, and you just heard Mike McVay talk about the options that the HD subchannels give broadcasters to program. 70% of the automotive industry has done that. And then the last one is text is available. I want to acknowledge before we get into this, these are my colleagues, part of our team at Q that have been working on this. Young man on the left is Jackson Houchins. Jackson knows more about auto dashes probably than anybody in America right now. An outstanding worker, diligent, and just did a terrific job in being very thorough. He collaborated with Joe Marshall on our team, who's Senior Director of Technical Services, you saw earlier. And then Susie Schultz, who's our head of marketing and is the founder of Creative Prism, has done a great job of helping us put this together with her collaborator, Jane Madsen, who's just done a great job in helping us convey these points in a way that are easy for people to see, understand, and absorb. So that being the case, let's take down the screen. There we go. And we'll now talk to our different friends in the boxes. I'm going to ask Joe to stay with us because we may have a technical question that comes up that he's going to be better served to answer. But I'll start with Fred because you started the list. I imagine that there are broadcasters that are listening to this webinar, and we are a cynical type. That's what happens in the radio industry. We all are taught to be just a little skeptical, and cynicism makes for a great punchline on a morning show. And so that carries through how we move things. What would you say to somebody that's looking at this and saying, okay, what's the news flash of this? Because you've been banging this drum and preaching this. Is there anything that came from this report that was a particular aha moment for you, or you're saying, look, you really need to pay attention to this particular piece of information?
Steve, to me, it absolutely underscores what we've talked about all along. And that's that in radio now, you just don't compete against the other country station in town. You don't just think about, okay, how are we better than them? You're competing against everybody. And I think when you see the new car capabilities being laid out the way they are in this report, it ought to hammer home to all broadcasters that you're competing against audio on all of these different platforms. And as Mike talked about, there's the visual aspect of this as well. You've got to start thinking about the screen as being part of your real estate. And I know with Joe and Xperi, clearly the visual aspect, games, all those things are in process as well. So, that sight and sound thing that Mike talked about, I think is very important. But, to me, the big takeaway here is you compete against everybody, and you've got to start thinking about your product as what is your unique difference? What is your why at this point? Not just up against other stations on the FM band, but against everybody.
As I was looking at this report, and I've been on panels with many of you for the last several years, different places, we're all kind of banging that same drum over and over. I think there are really two audiences that may be watching today. There's the one audience that says, yeah, if I do something visual, how many people are going to see it? Is it really something? Is there a there? And the second one is, oh no, what's going on with radio on the dashboard? Are we under assault? Are we as strong as we used to be? Let me address the latter, and I'll open up this as a thought, and then I'd like for you guys to opine on this. We have more competition, to Fred's point. It's not 6 buttons, 2 knobs, and a CD player anymore. But we are still the incumbents in the dashboard. The radio industry, I wouldn't want to trade places with anybody else. I mean, we've got people that are knocking on the door, but we are the incumbents. How much of this is a technical issue and how much of this is a content issue in terms of going forward? What I take away from this study is technically we're in pretty good shape in these vehicles. We've got an increasing amount of visual content available. Text is there 100%. We're in 100% of the vehicles on the FM band, 98% of the vehicles on the AM band. It feels to me like the best way to battle in today's car is a content play more so than wringing our hands over the technical play and taking advantage of the new technologies. I'll open it up. Jump ball. Anybody have a conversation?
Well, I'll jump first. So I say regularly to the friends of mine that sit and we have little confabs and ideation sessions that when I talk to my friends who are at the DSPs, they wish they had radio's reach. They wish they had our distribution, because they don't. And the challenge to me is that it's truly a content issue. We can't look at that only. I mean, this study presented some great information to us that we can improve upon our products and offer more attributes, if you will, or assets of why someone should want to listen to a station. But, we've got to figure out how to make what's coming out of the speakers better. That's really important. And then you add, if we can get to that, and you take something like Joe's company and what they're doing in creating visualization, because Fred and Paul have done great studies about how the car companies want to make the inside of that car like sitting inside of a speaker or an entertainment center. That's to me alone the call that says step it up. You got to step it up.
Well, I talk often about the listener experience, not just the audio experience and not just the visual experience, but I think we have to think, that it's one overall experience. And if XM, Sirius, Pandora, Spotify, everybody else is putting Apple CarPlay, Android, if everybody else is doing graphics and putting information up on the screen and making it a more engaging experience, radio has to do both. We got to have great content at the core. And then we've got to make that experience, just like you want your audio processing to sound great, you want that visual experience to be great. Joe, you guys have, I don't want to get off this panel without really talking about DTS and auto stage and what's coming for the radio industry, because that is, I think, unfortunately, as radio broadcasters, we have a tendency to think about, oh, here's the next thing, and then I'm done. And then here's the next thing, and then I'm done. So we got great news about HD radio, but that's not the, and then I'm done. DTS Auto Stage is a huge breakthrough for the radio industry. For those people that don't know, in a minute or less, and talk to me, not to your friends at Xperi, but talk to just the average Joe. Explain to people what it is, how it works, and why it is so cool.
Sure. Thanks for the opportunity. So DTS Auto Stage at its core is a connected radio platform. It basically combines the ability to listen to over-the-air broadcast radio that is enhanced with metadata that is delivered via a cellular connection to the car. So the user experience is kind of what you'd expect to see on your cable TV system. where you have a live guide. It shows you everything that's available for you to listen to. When you select a piece of content, you're going to get rich, consistent metadata for both HD radio and analog radio stations. And then we do a whole host of other things, like we put lyrics and events and a lot of other digital services that are really things you would see on like a Spotify. The exciting thing from my perspective about AutoStage is it's ramping much more quickly than HD radio. We're going to announce that we're just under 7 million cars at NAB, so I guess I pre-announced that. We're live in 155 countries, and we have 12 automakers currently in production. The real value is the ability to measure over-the-air listening. Because these cars are connected to our infrastructure, we are constantly monitoring where they are, what they're listening to, make all that data available for free to broadcasters. And I think it's just the tip of the iceberg, but it's allowing radio to really compete on both a service level and we'll see at the show, I think, on an advertising level with these pure digital platforms.
If I could just interject, I could just interject on what Joe said. Fred and I have been going to the Consumer Electronics Show for 16 years. And the first thing you see at that event is what you don't see, and that is radio. I mean, our presence at that event is not high at all, yet it's like a car show. And all the OEMs are there and all their executives are there. And the one constant representing radio for the past 16 years we've been going has been Xperi. And it's interesting when you speak to the car companies, and we do, that becomes the contact point. So, thank you, Joe. But, really putting our industry's efforts behind this speaking with one voice that you have been able to do is really, really important. And we're starting to see the benefits.
I just want to echo what Paul said, and we've got a lot of exciting things, the collaboration between Q and Xperi, we got a lot of exciting things that are also coming, but it does give, I call it the great leveling playing field, because an AM station, an FM station, an HD station, anybody has the same opportunity to look great with visualizations and graphics on DTS and have that information coming back to them. Chris Brunt, I think there's a QA button that people have an opportunity to access. If I'm saying this wrong, please jump in and correct me with that. We'll hear the voice of, I don't know if we'll see Chris, but if people have questions they'd like to submit, please do that. We've gotten a couple, and I'm going to turn to those in just a moment, but I want to give people that are on the webinar today a chance to opine in or offer questions or ask questions. And there should be a QA button, and then that'll get routed to us. One question we have: why do dashboard displays vary so much from one car company to another? Is there any way to standardize the displays?
Ladies and gentlemen, Joe D'Angelo.
Yeah. What we can standardize is the content. What we can't standardize is the layout. If you think of any interior in a vehicle, that is as much a piece of the brand as any other design element of the vehicle. And that look and feel is something that the OEMs take very seriously. They try to harmonize the whole driver experience with the command and control in the cockpit. And they all have different styles. They also have cost constraints. Those displays are not free. They cost a lot of money, so they require kind of that optimization of the user experience and the cost profile. I will point to Android and CarPlay as examples of what the auto industry hates. Like if you get into a $100,000 Mercedes or a $20,000 Kia, and you plug your smartphone into the car and run CarPlay, those displays look the same. All of that customization is out the window. So they take it very seriously. The best we can do is make sure that they're using our metadata appropriately. And we actually certify a lot of that around radio and AutoStage to ensure that they're not doing anything against the interest of the industry.
Yeah,
I
I was just going to say, Joe, I actually, I mean, it's a good question, but I think the movie's over. You know, the condition that enabled Apple CarPlay and Android Auto to be able to swoop in to all these vehicles was because the lack of standardization. And that's why people love Apple CarPlay in particular so much, because it's great for your vehicle. And then when you fly to Orlando and you rent a vehicle that you've never been in before, but you plug in your iPhone, you're good to go. Your screen looks just like it does in your home vehicle. So I think that war is over at this point, don't you? Yeah.
Honestly, I don't think so. I think we're seeing we're seeing the auto industry definitely push back. You know, you're seeing more bespoke platforms, you know, things like the Phoenicia App Store. The industry struggling with how do they retain influence and control over the media environment in the car. It's clearly going to be a very, very valuable media landscape, and to just cede design control and, you know, analytics to big tech is not something they're accepting easily. Let me put it that way.
I have a question that's just coming in from one of our viewers, and I want to answer it. It's an anonymous attendee, but it says two things. Under what circumstances is this data really important? It's not likely that I will look up what each of these models shows. Second, most vehicles on the road are older than this. How do you assess those vehicles' capabilities? So I'll take a swing at this, and then anybody's welcome to add a thought to that. So under what circumstances? Clearly, if you're working with vehicles and advertisers and you're putting more visual graphics or you're selling this up, you would know why this information is important. We get questions all the time, and radio stations get questions from their advertisers saying, I can't see it. Does my car have this? Is it offered? Or a sales rep has a hard time seeing it. So what we have done is we've provided one source where you're able to access that and say, yes, it is equipped to receive. Let's help you figure out how to get the settings right. Or no, it's not equipped, and you may want to make an informed decision later. Then the second point I think I addressed earlier, but I'll do it again. I clearly understand that this does not cover all of the vehicles that are on the highway. We had to start someplace, but we'll be adding to this database on an ongoing basis. So we'll be adding older vehicles throughout the year, and then next year we'll look at the 100 best-selling vehicles for 2025. So with all due respect to the anonymous attendee that asked the question, you got to start somewhere. We started with 100 of them, and we'll be adding to that. But if you're working at a radio station that's working with visual displays, you probably know why this information is important, and it helps people have one resource to get that information.
Steve, if I could just add a little more color. This report gives you precision. What I can also offer is we have 105 million cars on the road with HD radio. Every one of those supports HD radio text, and about 70% of them support graphics. I can guarantee that somewhere between 95 and 100% of them support RDS. So yeah, there are 300 million cars on the road, but I think we have a good anecdotal understanding of 100 million of them, and now you're giving us the precision to measure this going forward.
Yeah, it is tough. You've got a client at a radio station that has made a purchase and they're excited about adding the visuals, and they go out to their car and they're not able to see it. Maybe they don't know how their vehicle is equipped, or maybe they're having a hard time. We want to be a resource. Said that earlier. The whole point of this is not that we're trying to opine, it's that we're wanting to make sure we add a resource. I'm going to check and see if we have time for one more question. And here's a question I get a lot, and I will tell you what my answer is. It's, does the visual dashboard make driving less safe by distracting the driver? I think we all have to be cautious about distracted driving, but radio is not exactly at the cutting edge of this. Everybody else is providing the visualizations on the dashboard. We're NHTSA compliant. That's something that we always want to make sure that we tell our clients. We don't put moving video on display. We don't ever recommend that. So we're trying to get the radio industry caught up to speed with what else is going on. I'm not opining on what National Highway Traffic Safety Administration should be, but I can tell you that we're not leapfrogging past anybody. We're trying to make sure that we can get things up to at least the level of the competition there.
Yeah, I would
and
add to that.
Sure, go ahead.
Sorry,
Joe.
Steve. I would add that all these capabilities that we have deployed with HD Radio have been with the support and really analysis of the auto industry. We work very closely with the human factors groups. That's why the visuals, for example, that HD Radio support don't change more than every 30 seconds. So you're managing that driver workload with the visuals and making sure they're reducing distraction, not adding to it.
Great, thank you. And that was Peter Zolko that had that question, so I do appreciate it. And then we're at the 1 hour mark. I do have one more question. Joe, you alluded this a little bit earlier, but I can answer part of it from the Q perspective. Person says, I may have missed this, so apologies if I did, but can you share what proof of performance metrics you're able to provide advertisers? Can you provide attribution data to the result of audio and a Q spot? We can provide the as played in today's world. That's part of our attribution. We do provide that to our clients. But Joe, I'll leave you to answer the attribution portion because I'm not trying to be coy, but I'm not trying to get ahead of you on that issue.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So we, with the DTS AutoStage platform, I mentioned it's a connected platform. We're constantly monitoring what is being listened to in the vehicle. We are able to deliver great analytics around the audience. And we will be discussing on a panel with Pierre Bouvard and others at NAB how we are advancing that down to giving actual measurement and proof of performance and proof of audience for individual spots. So it is coming. It's not here yet, but it is definitely something that you will see hopefully by September.
Yeah, and I'll take a quick moment to add that's something that Q and DTS AutoStage are working very closely on because we want to make sure that we can provide that data. We think that that's a game changer for the radio industry, so we're excited about that, and that'll be coming in the future. Before we wrap up, let me thank again. We've got more questions than we do time. That's always a good situation to be in. Let me thank again Doug Hyde and Jackson Houchins and the team that brought this together, coordinated through Joe Marshall, who just does a yeoman's job for us at Q. Mike, Fred, Paul, Joe, thank each of you for participating. Chris Brunt, who was behind the scenes, Susie Schultz, who helped make this happen. We do appreciate everybody participating. Again, qreport.com is where it's available for you. It's free. You can access that and get information. This is going to be available on demand. So if you know somebody that missed it, or if you'd like to go back through and catch up again, we're going to be able to provide that to you. We do appreciate, we had a great attendance of this. We're really happy with the number of people that participate in this today. We hope we answered the questions. And we thank you for spending your time with us on a Wednesday afternoon as we all look forward to ways to make radio continue to be in such an important role, serving local communities all across the country and finding every way we can to be engaging, informative, relevant, and a part of people's everyday lives. And we think we have lots of great opportunities, both audibly and visually, to do that going forward. And certainly the future looks good for us in the automobile, but we can't take it for granted. There's lots of competition and we have to be on our toes. Thanks everybody. On behalf of my colleagues at Q, we do appreciate your being with us. I'm Steve Newberry. Thank you so much for joining us.